Our top story this half an hour, markets and investing today. The Dow tumbled more than 340 points yesterday. The sell-off following a surprise decline in manufacturing activity after the World Trade Organization cut its global trade forecast for the year. But the ISM number was really what markets reacted to yesterday, and it was the lowest in 10 years. Joining us right now is the chairman and CEO of Gamco Investors, Mario Gabelli. Mario, it's great to see you.
Good to be here.
Thank you so much for joining us. Tell us how you're investing and how anything has changed in terms of how you're allocating capital as we watch an economy that seems to be slowing down.
Well, there's no question that there are challenges. The consumer's in great shape, even with student loans and even with car loans. Relative to the last 10 years, net worth is at an all-time high. Maria, the uncertainty in the business community over tariffs is clearly having an impact on certain CapEx expenditures, and that'll have some slowed down effect. However, you can't ignore the General Motors strike today at the Economics Club in New York. Dennis Muhlenberg will talk about Boeing and all those planes that are parked and what's happening there, and that lift. And then obviously on October 15th, we'll see whether we can do nice with Xi. The things that I'm concerned about, you just touched on one. What happened with Korea? North Korea, what are they firing? Is that from a submarine? What are the Chinese doing with this hypersonic missiles? And then there's a lot of other news that's really interesting. For example, today there's two companies like FanDuel merging with another company, betting on sports. That's kind of not as important, but it's something that we think about in terms of the opportunities for companies.
Tell me about that, because we just went recently to the Meadowlands, and the Meadowlands, in terms of their sports betting, they say that they are rivaling Nevada when it comes to the activity in terms of sports betting. This is something that obviously you're invested in. Tell me about the strength in this business and why the excitement.
Well, do it a little differently. Last night, there was a playoff game against the Brewers and the Nationals. In the eighth inning, you had a wonderful dynamic. The point is that people were watching that, and advertisers were seeing more potential customers for their products, and therefore the sports teams will get more revenues. In addition to that, there's certain gambling companies will have the benefit. For example, Fox, a company you are involved with, Fox Bet is involved with one of these companies called the Sports Group. So that's a company called Flutter, and we like William Hill, we like GVC, and then the American companies that are involved in this. So bringing into the legal world the gray area of sports betting is what you're talking about, and that's kind of interesting to us.
Yeah, so do you think that we see other companies get into the space, or will we see consolidation here?
No,
how does this play out?
You'll have all of the above. MGM just cut a deal with XYZ. A company in Reno, Nevada, El Dorado, has cut a deal with William Hill. They own a piece of their domestic business. You'll see more of that online. And I'm not a big fan of sports betting. On the other side of the coin, I will participate in it. I mean, when the Yankees are playing this Friday night, maybe I would be willing to put a bet on it, but I can't do it in New York online. I have to go to New Jersey, and that's what you were talking to.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that'll change.
So that's one area. Where else do you see growth in the economy?
I think there's a tremendous need for our aerospace and defense. This supersonic and hypersonic dynamic that is taking place reminds me, Maria, of the Maginot Line, which were built in the 1930s, and the technology caused that to be obsolete. We have to put money into certain parts of our economy for expenditures to handle these new dynamics. And companies like Aerojet General, companies like Textron, which has some capabilities, Lockheed Martin, Northrop, those are kind of intriguing to me, even with the notion of an administration perhaps changing in next year at this time? 2020.
What about that? Do you think that we see a change in leadership? Will the Democrats
I don't want to get into
beat
that
President Trump?
No, that's irrelevant to me.
Business is shaking in its boots over Elizabeth Warren. You know that.
No, that's certainly an element, because you have all the way on the left and all the way on the right. You love to have mainstream. We have survived 120 years with some really good presidents and some really bad ones. And I think the capitalistic system, where you allocate capital with all the faults, we have to solve student loans, we have to solve some inequalities. We'll do that. So you have to cut costs, you have to raise taxes.
It's interesting. Wall Street doesn't seem to get upset about all of these headlines. And you don't see the markets really reacting, except for the fact that with all the fighting going on, they're not getting anything done. I mean, you're supposed to see USMCA, infrastructure, immigration, all these policies get done.
You know, yesterday on the news, there was a bridge that collapsed in Taiwan. A year ago was one in Genoa. This country has 200,000 bridges that need help. Why I was almost late this morning was the highway coming down to the speed bumps. Well, you couldn't speed anyway, but independent of that, at night you're going to have people crashing. We need an infrastructure bill. Cut the politics out. Let's get it done. Everybody that is common sense, that drives, everybody that walks. Eisenhower did this 60-odd years ago.
What about the China situation? How important is that to investors? Because the trade tensions seem to be an issue for manufacturing. I mean, the U.S. and China expected to resume these high-level trade talks next week. Bridgewater Associates founder and CEO Ray Dalio said that the U.S. may go further than just cutting capital flows to China. And, you know, when that headline came out on Friday, it did move markets.
From my point of view, you have the consumer, you have CapEx, you have state and local, and net exports make GDP in the U.S. In that regard, we have a $400 billion deficit with China. That means we owe them $400 billion a year. I have no problem. I grew up in a world in which Smoot-Hawley was back in the 1930s, Ricardo was good, and Adam Smith. The free market works, but you have to have a fair trade, and companies I talk to tell you that doesn't work. You've heard that before. However, China is important to global growth. And to the degree that they're 16% of the world's 90 trillion economy and their consumers like 45% and ours is 70, we want to grow the Chinese consumer. So I tell my friends who are Chinese, for patriotism, they should have more children and do it immediately.
Well, yeah, maybe get rid of that law, that your one-child law.
It's changed.
It's changing. You have a real expertise at Gamco in aerospace, I know that, and as well as in media. So tell me how you see the media and technology industry shaking out. There's a lot of conversation about regulation coming for tech companies. Media has consolidated. How do you see it?
Well, there's no question that technology has changed, and, you know, we have to applaud Bezos. I mean, he's the Henry Ford, in quotes, of 100 years ago in manufacturing and doing things that go direct to the consumer, and you have to applaud technology in terms of getting data, artificial intelligence, and it has challenges. From my end, it's not complicated. Yesterday, the Court of Appeals in Washington, D.C. ruled that Ajit Pai's move, the Federal Communication Chairman, with regards to a net neutrality was valid, which means that if I am hogging the cable network with high requirements for speed, I may be able to charge them more. Just like a Class A truck going over the George Washington Bridge has to pay more than a passenger car. This is very good for allocation of capital and paying people for what they create. So there's positives. In terms of what I like.
Yeah, where do you invest in that?
Look, I'll take a simple company. I think Disney coming back down like this with $7 to $7.50 of earnings. I think 15 to 20 multiple, $130 to $160 price, 3 or 4 years. I think they're going to do quite well in taking their content and marketing it globally. I think CBS and Viacom with 615 million shares pro forma for the combination. They're going to do $28 billion, $30 billion in rough numbers of cash flow with CapEx of $120 million. They could put money into R&D. I think that's going to be an interesting stock. It's collapsed here. It's down to $40 on CBS, and Viacom's 24. That's VIAB. And then obviously there's a company called Fox. And, you know, basically, again, 615 million shares. Where exactly is the cash flow going to go? Significant cash flow over the next 3 or 4 years. Kind of intriguing to me. And then some small broadcasters, Maria. We had Tribune. That's been taken over in pieces. And I see Standard General buying Tegna. Apollo's looking at Tegna. Tegna's a $15 stock. And so those are interesting. So
the growth in media, is it streaming? Is it,
all of the above?
Okay.
Everything that you can conceivably think of. Give the consumer what they want, when they want it, at the lowest possible cost, and do it a cost-effective way and make money. For example, music. Who would have thought Spotify? Who would have thought Pandora? So you want to buy Vivendi because they have 25% of the music A&R and library. And Sony is terrific at $58. So there's a lot going on, a lot of stocks. In fact, some even nano caps in large companies. And real quick before you go, on aerospace, will Boeing recover? I will tell you at 12:30 today what the CEO... we have an individual that works for us that flew F-18s. He's in the Marine Corps Reserves. as a lieutenant colonel, and he goes through every day how you have to handle the flight
So
pattern.
you're still studying it?
I think we're past that. I think the cash flows for Boeing over the next couple of years, a stock that I like because they just got certification for the longitude and latitude. The new plane is Textron at $47, $48. Then there's others like Command. There's a lot going on.
You've liked Textron for a long time.
I liked it when the stock dropped to $3 back 10 years ago.
I remember that.
It's only 48 today. So as a result of that, I think over the next 3 or 4 years you can do well with it.
All right, before we go, would you sell anything here? Because there's always that worry that markets are going to tumble on the uncertainty.
There's no question that one has to say higher probability of an economic slowdown. However, the fact that a year ago, 12 months ago, the 10-year bond was 321. Today it's 167. So you're providing a little bit of a floor, but a 10% correction in the market, so what?
All right, we'll leave it there. Always great to get your insights, Mario.
Good to see you.
It's great to see you. Mario Gabelli from Gamco.